afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Cheddar Climate, the fight for change. I'm Ken Bufa in for Hannah Doba.
Ken, it's great to see you this afternoon. And hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Schuler. We have got a great show on tap.
That's right. Each week on Cheddar Climate, we'll shed a light on the critical initiatives aimed at addressing the climate crisis. Plus, we'll examine how it's transforming our lives and what we can do to be part of the solution. On this episode, we're exploring the devastating effects of hurricanes and why each season seems to be worse than the last.
It is here, hurricane season, and coming up, we're going to speak to the author of Disasterology and assistant professor of emergency management at the Massachusetts Maritime Academy, Samantha Montano, about her experience in the aftermath of Hurricanes Katrina and Harvey and whether she thinks we're ready for the next disaster. Plus, we'll talk to the Chief Sustainability Officer of Keurig, Marie-Claire DeVoe, about how the luxury fashion industry is implementing sustainable practices from the production line to the storefront. But let's dive in here with our first guest. Storms over the weekend devastating some communities in the eastern part of the U.S., with flooding in Tennessee leaving at least 21 people dead and still 10 missing. Further north, Tropical Storm Henri temporarily left more than 100,000 people without power in New England. And joining me now is Jonathan Porter, Chief Meteorologist at AccuWeather. Jonathan, thanks for coming on the show this afternoon. So let's start with Tennessee. What led to the catastrophic and sudden flooding that we see there that this community is still reeling from?
Kristen, good afternoon. Always good to be with you. You're right. It was an astounding situation in terms of how quickly the flooding arrived across the Waverly, Tennessee area and surrounding communities. Really was a series upon series of thunderstorms that trained. That meant they ran over the same areas for hours on end, both in the Waverly area and then also producing tremendous rain just to the north in the area where the water flows down into Waverly. And we were talking about a foot of rainfall, or in some places even 14 or 15 inches in the matter of 12 hours, or a little bit just over that. So it was a very significant amount of rain in a short period of time, and it led to that flash flooding disaster across the Waverly area with so much loss of life and lives changed forever in just a few moments.
And we do know President Biden, yes, declaring it a disaster, which will free up some federal aid to go there. But Jonathan, I was also reading they got more than triple the rainfall forecast. I mean, how does that happen, and is climate change to blame?
Well, we were dealing with a very significant amount of rainfall in a short period of time, as we mentioned, and there had been indications that there would be flooding in that area in advance. And here at AccuWeather, we warned of the flash flooding about a half an hour before before other warnings were issued in that particular area, because we saw rain redeveloping over the same areas with very saturated ground. It just is another reinforcement to take all weather warnings, including flash flood warnings, very seriously, because that water can rise very quickly in this type of a situation, a true emergency that demanded immediate action in those areas. As to your larger point, Kristen, these types of heavy rainfall situations are occurring more often. Look at what has happened already this year in terms of what happened in Europe with the flash flooding, and also earlier episode in China earlier this summer as well, where there was 20 inches of rain in just a matter of several hours. This is linked to climate change. The IPCC report was very clear that these extreme rainfall amounts over short periods of time, that's increasing in frequency, and that's something that we're going to have to be dealing with here going forward. So it is a very serious situation.
Well, let's talk about what happened up here in the Northeast in New England as well. Tropical Storm Henri certainly slamming parts of the East Coast, and didn't turn out to be, I think, as bad as projected in some circumstances. But of course, the cleanup's still happening in parts of New Jersey, and now a heat wave that we find upon us as well. Talk to me about that and what the weather patterns indicate.
Well, that's a great point, is that we were dealing with Henri's wide-ranging impacts, as we had been talking about here at AccuWeather for several days. The biggest thing we were concerned about was the flooding rainfall. And we saw heavy rainfall, over 8 inches of rain in the New York City area, up into parts of eastern New York, especially where there's a little bit of terrain just south of Albany, even into northeastern Pennsylvania as well, and northern New Jersey, where there was widespread flooding. So there's a lot of rain and flood-related impacts to clean up for over the next couple of days. Kristen, as you mentioned, it's going to be hot and humid. very uncomfortable in terms of the level of humidity that we're going to be dealing with. But the heavy rain threat is over across the Northeast from Henri, which is great news. Also, there was quite a bit of tree damage across Connecticut and Rhode Island, as we were talking about. Thankfully, not as much in the way of power outages across those areas. So people in the Northeast are going to be picking up from our latest storm here over the next several days.
Yeah, I know, at least here in New York City, didn't turn out to be as bad as predicted, but of course our hearts go out to those who were affected. Jonathan, I want to ask you about what's happening in Central America. I know you've been following some weather patterns down there.
Well, with a very active tropical season, as we've been talking about for months here at AccuWeather, we saw the ocean and atmospheric parameters coming together for another busy season. We did not think it would be as active as the record 2020 season, but still an above average year, and that is exactly what is panned out. We've had 8 named storms already. Typically, it takes until the end of September to get there from an average perspective. If you were running about a month ahead of time, but well below the pace of storms that we had last year. We were up to Marco by this time last year in late August. So that's where the season is positioning itself. We have been watching the next threat, and that's an area of disturbed weather across Central America. It's going to take a couple of days to get its act together here, it looks like, as it comes up toward the Yucatan Peninsula as we make our way through later in the week. And then it does look like there's going to be the potential for this to develop into a tropical storm or perhaps a hurricane and threaten parts of Mexico and or South Texas as we head into late in the weekend or early next week. So folks that are living in those areas are going to want to stay tuned and watch the progress of this system. We know the water is very warm in that part of the Gulf of Mexico, so that's always a concern this time of the year.
Jonathan, you know the stuff inside and out. I got to ask you about how this hurricane season is stacking up and what the predictions from NOAA are. I mean, could we see more or less hurricanes this year than last?
Well, the season, as we talked about, has been very active already. We've had, in fact, 5 landfalls, all interestingly enough, tropical storms, Kristen, here in the United States thus far, with wide-ranging impacts, mostly related to flooding rain. In fact, remember, we just last week had Tropical Storm Fred come up through the Florida Panhandle and was a flooding situation all the way up through the Appalachians into the Northeast. So we've been dealing with quite a bit of impacts already. As expected, we are looking for this year to be above average. We think that September could be quite active, but the weather pattern actually, as we head into October and even early November, looks like it might favor that hurricane season persisting a little bit longer than normal with some more activity. So we'll be watching that very closely. We think it's going to be a pretty active time here as we head through the rest of the fall. But just how the wind pattern set up in the Atlantic Ocean will really modulate whether it's busy or very busy for the rest of the season. Either way, we want everybody along the coast and in the interior to be prepared. It's likely there'll be more impacts in the United States through the rest of the hurricane season.
We do. We want to be prepared. Jonathan, thank you for helping us get prepared. That's Jonathan Porter, Chief Meteorologist at AccuWeather. All right, well, coming up, we are examining the impact years